Chapter 36. Herbert and I went from bad to worse in the way of increasing our debts, looking over our affairs, leaving margins, and the like exemplary transactions. And time went on, as Everall know he has a way of doing, and I came of age, in fulfilment of Herbert's prediction that I should do so before I knew where I was. Herbert himself had come of age 8 months before me, as he had nothing else than his majority to come into. So the event didn't make a profound sensation in Barnard's Inn. But we had looked forward to my 21st birthday with a crowd of speculations and anticipations, for we had both considered that my guardian couldn't help saying something definite on that occasion. I had taken care to have it well understood in Little Britain when my birthday was. On the day before it, I received an official note from Wemmick informing me that Mr. Jaggers would be glad if I call upon him at 5 in the afternoon on that auspicious day. This convinced us that something great was about to happen and threw me into an unusual flutter when I repaired to my guardian's office the moment of punctuality. In the outer office, Wemmick offered me his congratulations and incidentally rubbed the side of his nose with a folded piece of tissue paper which I liked the look of. But he said nothing in respecting it and motioned me with a nod into my guardian's room. It was November, and my guardian was standing before his fire, leaning with his back against the chimney-piece, with his hands under his coat-tails. "Well, Pip," said he, "I must call you Mr. Pip today. Congratulations, Mr. Pip." We shook hands. He was always a remarkably short shaker, and I thanked him. "Take a chair, Mr. Pip," said my guardian. As I sat down, and he preserved his attitude and bent his brows at his boots, I felt I was at a disadvantage, such as reminded me of that old time when I had been put upon a tombstone. The two ghastly casts on the shelf were not far from him, and their expression were as if they were making a stupid, apoplectic attempt to attend to the conversation. "Now, my young friend," my guardian began, as if I were a witness in the box, "I am going to have a word or two with you." "If you please, sir." "What do you suppose," said Mr. Jaggers, bending forward to look at the ground and then throwing his head back to look at the ceiling, "what do you suppose you are living at the rate of?" "At the rate of, sir?" "Ah," repeated Mr. Jaggers, still looking at the ceiling, "the rate of," and then looking all around the room, paused with his pocket handkerchief in his hand halfway to his nose. I had looked into my affairs so often that I had thoroughly destroyed any slight notion I might ever have had of their bearings. Reluctantly, I confessed myself quite unable to answer the question. The reply was agreeable to Mr. Jaggers, who said, "I thought so," and blew his nose with an air of satisfaction. "Now, I have asked you a question, my friend," said Mr. Jaggers. "Have you anything to ask of me?" "Of course, it would be a great relief to me to ask you several questions, sir, but I remember your prohibition." "Ask one," said Mr. Jaggers. "Is my benefactor to be made known to me today?" "No." "Ask another." "Is that confidence to be imparted to me soon?" "Waive that a moment," said Mr. Jaggers, "and ask another." I looked about me, but there appeared to be no possible escape from the inquiry. Have I anything to receive from you, sir?" On that, Mr. Jaggers said triumphantly, "I thought we should come to it," and called to Wemmick to give me the piece of paper. Wemmick appeared, handed it in, and disappeared. "Now, Mr. Pip," said Mr. Jaggers, "attend if you please. You have been drawing pretty freely here. Your name occurs pretty often in Wemmick's cash book. But you are in debt, of course?" "I am afraid I must say yes, sir." "You know you must say yes, don't you?" said Mr. Jaggers. "Yes, sir." "I don't ask you what you owe, because you don't know, and if you did know, you wouldn't tell me. You would say less." "Yes, yes, my friend," cried Mr. Jaggers, waving his forefinger to stop me, as I made a show of protesting. "It's likely enough that you think that you wouldn't, but you would. You'll excuse me, but I know better than you. Now, take this piece of paper in your hand. You've got it? Very good. Now, unfold it and tell me what it is." This is a banknote," said I, "for £500. "That is a banknote," repeated Mr. Jaggers, "for £500, and a very handsome sum of money too, I think. You consider it so?" "How could I consider it otherwise?" "Ah, but answer the question," said Mr. Jaggers. "Undoubtedly." "You consider it undoubtedly a handsome sum of money. Now, that handsome sum of money, Pip, is your own. It is a present to you on this day, in earnest of your expectations. And at the rate of that handsome sum of money per annum, and at no higher rate, you are to live until the donor of the whole appears. That is to say, you will now take your money from Wemmick, £125 per quarter, until you are in communication with your fountainhead, and no longer with the mere agent. As I have told you before, I am the mere agent. I execute my instructions, and I am paid for doing so. I think them injudicious, but I am not paid for giving my opinion on their merits." I was beginning to express my gratitude to my benefactor for the great liberality with which I was treated, when Mr. Jaggers stopped me. "I am not paid, Pip," he said coolly, "to carry your words to anyone." And then he gathered up his coat-tails, and he gathered up the subject, and stood frowning at his boots, as if he suspected them of having designs upon him. After a pause, I hinted, "There was a question just now, Mr. Jaggers, which you desired of me to waive for a moment. I hope I am doing nothing wrong in asking it again." "What is it?" said he. I might have known that he would never help me, but it took me aback to have to shape the question afresh. So, as if it were quite new, I said, "Is it likely," I said, after hesitating, "that my patron, the fountainhead you have spoken of, Mr. Jaggers, will soon—" There I delicately stopped. "Will soon what?" asked Mr. Jaggers. "That is no question as it stands, you know." "Will soon come to London," said I, after casting about for a precise form of words, "or summon me anywhere else." "Now here," replied Mr. Jaggers, fixing me for the first time with his dark, deep-set eyes, "here we must revert to the evening on which we first encountered one another in your village. What did I tell you then, Pip?" You told me, Mr. Jaggers, that it might be years hence when that person appeared." "Just so," said Mr. Jaggers, "and that is my answer." As we looked full at one another, I felt my breath come quicker in my strong desire to get something out of him, and as I felt it come quicker, and as I felt he saw that it was going to come quicker, I felt that I had less chance of getting anything out of him at all. "Do you suppose it will still be years hence, Mr. Jaggers?" Mr. Jaggers shook his head, not in negating the question, but in negating altogether the notion that he could anyhow be got to answer it. And the two horrible casts twitched their faces and looked when my eyes strayed upon them as if they had come to a crisis in their suspended attention and were about to sneeze. "Come," said Mr. Jaggers, warming the backs of his legs with the backs of his warmed hands. "I'll be plain with you, Mr. Pip. That's a question I must not be asked. You'll understand that better when I'll tell you it's a question that might compromise me. Come, I'll go a little further with you. I'll say something more." He bent down so low to frown at his boots that he was able to rub the calves of his legs in the pause that he made. "If and when that person discloses," said Mr. Jaggers, straightening himself, "you and that person will settle your own affairs. When that person discloses, my part in the business will cease and determine. When that person discloses, it will not be necessary for me to know anything about it, and that is all I have got to say." We looked at one another until I withdrew my eyes and looked thoughtfully at the floor. From this last speech I derived the notion that Miss Havisham, for some reason or no reason, had not taken him into her confidence as to designing me for Estella. That he resented this and felt a jealousy about it, or that he really did object to that scheme and would have nothing to do with it. When I raised my eyes again, I found that he had been shrewdly looking at me all the time and was doing so still. "Is that all you have to say, sir?" I remarked. "If it is, there can be nothing left for me to say." He nodded assent and pulled out his thief-dreaded watch and asked me where I was going to dine. I replied at my chambers with Herbert. As a necessary sequence, I asked him if he would favour us with his company, and he promptly accepted the invitation, but he insisted on walking home with me in order that I might make no extra preparation for him, and first he had a letter or two to write, and of course had his hands to wash. So I said I would go into the outer office and talk to Wemmick. The fact was that when the £500 had come into my pocket, a thought had come into my head which had often been there before, and it appeared to me that Wemmick was a good person to advise with concerning such a thought. He had already locked up his safe and made preparations for going home. He left his desk, brought out his two greasy office candlesticks and stood them in line with the snuffers on the slab near the door, ready to be extinguished. He had raked his fire low, put his hat on and greatcoat ready, and was beating himself all over the chest with his safe key as an athletic exercise after business. "Mr. Wemmick," said I want to ask you a question. I am very desirous to help a friend." Wemmick tightened his post office mouth and shook his head as if his opinion were dead against any fatal witness of that sort. "That friend," I pursued, is trying to get on in commercial life, but has no money and finds it difficult and disheartening to make a beginning. Now, I want to help him to make a beginning." "Mr. Pip," said Wemmick. "Mr. Pip, I should like just to run over you, on my fingers, if you please, the names of the various bridges as high as Chelsea Reach. Let's see, there's London, 1, Southwark, 2, Blackfriars, 3, Waterloo, 4, Westminster, 5, Vauxhall, 6. He had checked off each bridge in its turn with the handle of his safe key and the palm of his hand. "That's as many as 6, you see, to choose from." "I don't understand," said I. "Choose your bridge, Mr. Pip," returned Wemmick, "and take a walk upon your bridge, and pitch your money into the Thames over the centre arch of your bridge, and you know the end of it. Help a friend with your money, and you may know the end of it too, but it'll be a less than pleasant and profitable end." I could have posted a newspaper in his mouth. He made it so wide after saying this. "This is very discouraging," said I. "Meant to be so," said Wemmick. "Then it is your opinion," I inquired with a little indignation, "that a man should never—" "Invest portable property in a friend," said Wemmick. "Certainly he should not, unless he wants to get rid of the friend, and then it becomes a question of how much portable property it may be worth to get rid of him." "And that," said I, "is your deliberate opinion, Mr. Wemmick?" "That," he returned, "is my deliberate opinion in the office." "Ah," said I, pressing him, for I thought I saw near a loophole here. But would you have a different opinion in Walworth?" "Mr. Pip," he replied with gravity, "Walworth is one place, and this office is another, much as the aged is one person and Mr. Jaggers is another. They must not be confounded together. My Walworth sentiments must be taken at Walworth. None but my official sentiments can be taken in this office." "Very well," said I, much relieved. "Then I shall look you up at Walworth. You may depend upon it." "Mr. Pip," he returned, "you'll be welcome there in a private and personal capacity." We held this conversation in a low voice, well knowing my guardian's ears to be the sharpest of the sharp, as he now appeared in his doorway toweling his hands. Wemmick got on his greatcoat and stood by to snuff out the candles. We all three went into the street together, and from the doorstep Wemmick turned his way, and Mr. Jaggers and I turned ours. I couldn't help wishing more than once that evening that Mr. Jaggers had an aged in Garrard Street, or a stinger, or something or somebody to unbend his brows a little. It was an uncomfortable consideration on a 21st birthday that coming of age at all seemed hardly worth the while in such a guarded and suspicious world as he made of it. He was 1,000 times better informed and cleverer than Wemmick, and yet I would be 1,000 times less ready to open my confidence to him, and I would have rather had Wemmick to dinner. Mr. Jaggers made not me alone intensely melancholy, because after he was gone, Herbert said to himself, with his eyes fixed on the fire, that he thought he must have committed a felony and forgotten the details of it. He felt so dejected and guilty.